Distinguished colleagues, it is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you today at this important annual forum of the Danube Region Strategy. Hello, good morning. Especially in light of the ongoing challenges that affect us all in the region. I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to contribute to this session entitled Impacts of the War in Ukraine in Regards to Security. Many more to come.
Yeah, the academic 15 minutes, they are punctual.
My name is Verena Linzmeier. I'm a representative of the PAC 11 from Munich in Germany. And before we delve into the heart of today's topic, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our partners, Bulgaria, whose unwavering commitment and collaboration within the priority area 11 have been nothing short of exemplary. I don't know, maybe we can take a next slide. Thank you. Is our presentation on? Thank you. Oh, okay. Yeah. The work we have done together is a testament to the power of cooperation in addressing the many complex issues we face in the Danube region. I look forward to continue this fruitful partnership and achieving even more in the years to come. In this context, I would also like to highlight our successful collaboration with other PAs. Particularly noteworthy is our long-standing cooperation with PA 1A, where we aim to enhance the safety of the Danube as a waterway, transportation and traffic artery through the implementation of various measures. As you will see later, there is still much to be done in this regard. Additionally, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to Bosnia and Herzegovina as the current presidency for providing us with the platform to discuss the vital work of Priority Area 11. Your leadership has been instrumental in bringing together the diverse stakeholders of the Danube region, and we are grateful for your support in this endeavor. I must also offer a special thank you to Christian Rabini from the Police of Munich and to Walter Kemp and Brian Lee from the Global Initiative Against Transnational and Organized Crime for their invaluable contributions in shaping today's session. The expertise, insight, and dedication that you bring to this topic are deeply appreciated. And I am confident that the session we have today will not only be informative, but also inspire towards actions in the greater security and stability in our region. The war in Ukraine has dramatically reshaped the security landscape in Europe, with far-reaching consequences for the entire Danube region. In our work within Priority Area 11, we have been focused on promoting security and the rule of law in the Danube region, and the current crisis highlights just how important this mission has become. The conflict has introduced new challenges, from the influx of refugees, the smuggling of weapons, to the heightened risk of hybrid threats that now plague us. As a region, we must adapt, strengthen our resilience, and cooperate more than ever. Today, as we reflect on these security impacts, we will explore not only the direct consequences, but also the long-term implications for the stability of the region. What lessons can we learn from this crisis, and how can we collectively move forward to ensure a safer, more secure future for all the people in the Danube region? The road ahead may be fraught with challenges, but with collaboration, innovation, and shared commitment, I believe we can overcome them. The work of PA 11 is more vital than ever, and I'm confident that today's session will pave the way for further advancements in our common goal of a secure and stable Danube region. Thank you for coming and participating at our session. I'm looking forward to productive and insight session. I may give the floor now to Christian Rabini from the Munich Police. Just a general note. We have reserved a time slot for your questions at the end of our presentation.
All right. Thank you, Verena. I will take the mic, so I hope it does not backfire. So good morning. As I said, my name is Christian Rabini. I'm working for the Munich Police Department, and I'm the International Police Cooperation Coordinator. So my job is support investigations that have international links. That means I do exchange information. I support joint investigation teams. We do collaborations with other countries through projects in order to facilitate investigations, especially in the field of organized crime. That is also why we have our distinguished guests from the global initiatives here. You will hear more from them later. So I want to start out by giving you the context that police and law enforcement in Europe is currently operating under, and then show you why we have certain workshops going on and also some workshops in the pipeline, and why we need collaboration and also the support from programs like the EUSDR. So in order to start with the context, who of you had any issues coming to Bosnia? Meaning you probably went to the airport and you showed your passport, you jumped the line because they now have these nice screens where you simply put your European biometric passport and zip, you're in. The rest of the line has to stay there and it's still stamped by a grudgy official. So anyone having issues except for the Bosnian colleagues who probably came by car, and traffic jams are a legend, I think. Yeah, you had issues. Oh, you brought your ID. So where are you from? Hungary, but it's still European Union. But of course, and they let you in? They let you in? Oh, okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, he's here. So, yeah. Who the colleagues from? Yeah. Okay, that's professional border policing in action. So they made you come. That's very kind. But in general, it's extremely easy, and a lot of people forget, especially within the European Union, the colleagues who will, according to the report that came out today, by 2030, it's a high likelihood that a couple of new members will join the European Union. But up to this point, it's the Schengen area or the Schengen Agreement that has brought so much easy travel to the European Union, and we forget it. We forget it on a daily basis. The colleagues who are not yet part, they not. Does anyone know that they actually have a milestone birthday this year? So the Schengen Agreement celebrates 40 years, and it's an extreme. I need this one. Where is it? So it's actually, oh, it goes the other way around. So it's actually something that a lot of countries in the world envy Europe for. We talk to a lot of colleagues from Asian countries, from South America, especially at the moment. And they tell us, wow, the Schengen area is something to celebrate, and we agree. Free movement of capital and persons is not to be taken for granted. At the moment, this is something that we celebrate, but at the same time, it's not only the nice people who use the Schengen system and the Schengen Agreement. And that is why we have to work on those who use the Schengen area for illicit purposes. And of course, also within the Danube region, you will see more on how this comes into play when the GI Global Initiative has their use case presentation. But how does this work out for us? Takes a while. For us, a very big issue within the Schengen system are so-called mobile organized crime groups. You see the definition that the EU Commission came up a while back, so in 2010. It's an association of offenders, so it's organized, more than 2 people collaborating and who systematically acquire wealth through theft of property or fraud, and having a wide ranging area of operations. So this include property crime like burglaries, simple pickpocketing. It can be drug trafficking. It can be arms trafficking. So these groups pose a big issue for us. So that is why we cooperate, of course, closely with Europol, the European law enforcement agency. We call them the law cooperating agency because they do a lot of coordination and they are a vital partner in the fight against these groups. And it's very, it's not a topic that I talk about and it happens once a month. We currently have a group operating in Munich where we exchange information on a daily basis. It's a group coming outside of the European Union, coming into the European Union using Schengen visa. And as soon as you're in, you can travel freely without having to show your passport. So that is why we used one of the funding opportunities that came about from the EUSDR to have a workshop bringing together colleagues. It were more than 120 colleagues from 18 countries and Europol in the room to discuss the characteristics of currently active MOCGs. So as I said, we have a lot of them. We presented practices of international police cooperation because one of the issues is people can move around freely, but at the same time, we still have European laws. So German police, Munich police is not allowed to investigate in Hungary, for example, but we can, of course, cooperate. But the perpetrators who do burglaries, for example, in Germany, and they run off with their proceeds by car, they go through Austria, then they go to Hungary, and we can only, we're behind them. So it's crucial to have this cooperation in place. And of course, I will talk about that in a second. They use technology that is providing them advantages that have not so far been on the radar. The results of this conference, which happened last year, the next version is going to be funded by the EUSDR next year, is a creation of list of recommendations. So there's also a report out. I don't know it's how the distribution and dissemination of that report works, but I think the other PAs can officially ask for permission to receive that report. And one of the key points, and we can only focus on that over and over again, is the increase of intra and interagency cooperation. So within a certain, within countries, between certain agencies, border police, customs, and criminal investigation departments, there's a we discussed the development of a European barrier model. So if these groups operate and they come from a certain country A, they travel to Germany to commit crimes, they travel on to Switzerland, a non-EU but a Schengen associated country. How can we make it as difficult as possible for them to operate within the confines of our jurisdiction? And of course, the focus should be on learn from existing cooperations with NGOs and private companies. And the best examples sit there and study their report. And of course, follow the money. So money laundering has become a huge issue for us as well. So this is in a nutshell what we did with that report. The second, so we operate within the context of the Schengen system, but at the same time, there are trends that are shaping and changing the way criminals operate and how we try to address them. And the best report to go to is the EU SOCTA, so the Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment. Good morning. That is published every 5 years, and it summarizes what is happening in Europe. This is done by Europol. How do they do that? They are able to analyze all the information that all EU countries and operational partners, so overall it's around 45 countries collaborating with Europol on a daily basis. They analyze the data being exchanged, and then they come up with priorities that European countries and the Europol will focus on. And in that report, you also see the trends that we have to deal with. And it's not a new issue. Artificial intelligence is changing the way we have to operate and the way, of course, criminals operate on a daily basis. So you see it here. You can download it if you want. The QR code is there. Artificial intelligence is a catalyst for crime. So if you imagine ChatGPT and other large language models being used for cyber grooming, so address underage minors online, they can do it very fast, they can do it easier, and you can also not only use text, but you can use audio, you can use Sora. Whoever got one of the first accounts is probably happy to create very real videos that are being used online to support investment schemes, for example, so investment fraud. Someone like an actor who is promoting a fake website for investment purposes. This is happening on a daily basis, and a huge problem for us as well. So deepfakes, one of the key buzzwords at the moment. And then, of course, it's the conflicts, such as the war Russia leads against Ukraine, that feeds into all these trends. So the trends of new technologies, the trends of European collaboration at a crossroads. And within that context, we see that a lot of organized crime is reshuffling their networks. They are using new technology, and they are profiteering from a new and phenomenon, I'd say, that organized crime has. It's specialization. So we do not have the old Godfather-like organization of mafia, where you have the Godfather with cotton in the back of his mouth and talking and giving orders. But it's highly specialized crime as a service providers. So there's one group that focuses on the actual crime. There's one group focusing on passing on, fencing the proceeds. There's one group focusing on doing all the money laundering. So it's highly specialized, it's much faster, and it operates in very difficult situations such as modern conflict. So this is in a nutshell the trends that we see. And I will talk about a couple workshops that we do after the presentation, but this is a good way to show you the current trends that we see. So operating within the Schengen system, new technology, and crime as a service, and a professionalization of these groups, and how this looks in reality. And that is why we invited both Walter and Brian to give us more insight and provide us with a use case on that. And with that, and without further ado, I would pass on to you.
Thanks very much. I will follow your example of talk show host and work off the big screens here. My name is Walter Kemp. I'm Director of Communications at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. It's a network of experts around the world analyzing organized crime, looking for more effective responses, and trying to build bridges between civil society and government, but also have more evidence-based policies that could deal with some of the risks that have been identified. We are based in Vienna and Geneva and around the world. And Vienna is a relatively safe place. But we were doing a project on assessing illicit economies in the Western Balkans and stumbled upon a few examples of major seizures of drugs and cigarettes on the river and thought, well, maybe this is something that we should look into. So I'm going to give you a few of the findings from a report called Undercurrents. We have some copies here if you're interested. Oops. Counterintuitive. So the river itself is about 3,000 kilometers long. And I think what we sometimes forget is that on both ends of the river, there's a sea. So you have the North Sea on one end and the Black Sea on the other. And my impression is that PA 11 of the EU strategy, the security aspect of that strategy was sort of an add-on. It kind of came at the end. The other thing is that when people look at the river, they're seldom looking at that bit at the bottom where you have Danube ports in Ukraine and a port in Moldova. I think very often people forget that there are those ports on that side of the river. We therefore decided to look at the different vulnerabilities of the river and see what could be done to improve cooperation. We carried out a study, both desktop, but also visiting various places on the river, talking to the people who are responsible for security. These are some of the observations. I think they're a little bit hard to see. I'll go through them. But the first is that there's very little attention to the issue of organized crime in the Danube. People think, you know, it's just the tourist ships, it's the barges. There's no big problem with organized crime. We don't see any big seizures. We have other priorities. And let's face it, among countries that border the Danube, the main issue is migration across land. It's not smuggling on the Danube. There are very few organized crime risk assessments. Maybe you guys have seen some, but there was the mention of the recent SOCTA. The last organized crime threat assessment of the Danube, I think, was more than 15 years ago, and the world has changed a lot since then. There's a tendency to focus on safety of the river as opposed to security. So navigation, this type of thing, but not the threat of organized crime. Also, there are some linguistic barriers along the river. And don't forget all the advantages that Christian mentioned about the Schengen zone. The river goes in and out of the Schengen zone. So you don't have all of those advantages all the way up and down the river. In terms of border management, there's limited cross-border trans-riparian law enforcement cooperation. To me, this seems like a no-brainer that countries that are actually part of Europol and in the EU would cooperate together. But it is very much like the pursuit on land, like in the old movies, that the bad guys would go across the border and then the police have to stop. That's a little bit like it still is on the Danube. And you would think that those days are gone. There's no trans-Danubian police and customs cooperation network. Again, it seems kind of strange, but there isn't one. And EU countries go to other parts of the world and encourage countries to have that kind of cooperation on different rivers like the Mekong and the Amazon and so on. But we don't have it in this 3,000 kilometer river that goes through the heart of Europe. And there's no integrated border management system along the river. In terms of data collection, again, some strange things, but there's no common database. For example, on seizures of suspicious ships, that was a tongue twister, suspicious ships, and no database on vessel history. There aren't that many barges that go up and down the river. You could have a database which would say, okay, this ship has a strange track record. There are different rules on data collection and sharing, even between EU countries. So between Romania and Hungary, for example, between Hungary and Croatia, there's no standardized passenger name record. How is that possible? All the things that were just mentioned about going through airports, it doesn't apply for barges on the river. Why is that different? And there's no compulsory or uniform use of a system that already exists for reporting on sharing information. For policing, there's limited intelligence sharing. I don't know if it's to do with a lack of trust or a lack of a sense of urgency. But again, we were talking about at breakfast about a case where the Hungarians discovered by accident a very large seizure of cigarettes. A lot of cargo is carried in so-called big bags. You've probably seen these huge bags that are loaded on ships one of the straps on the bag broke. All of these things fell on the deck, and there were millions of euros worth of cigarettes underneath. The Romanians had 3 similar cases in the previous months, but didn't think to share this information with the Hungarians, 2 neighboring countries. That could have improved some intelligence-led policing. There's little cooperation between ports. So down the Black Sea end of the river, you have a lot of ports very close together, Ismail, Reni, Giurgiulest in Moldova. The ports don't share information between each other, which again seems rather strange. In some cases, there's a lack of staff or a lack of properly trained staff. We went to the port in Moldova and met some of the security guards. The fellow said, well, we've had container screening security from the UN. And I said, yeah, but there are no containers. These are barges. And he said, yeah, it was fun, but we couldn't apply it. So what is the good of that? There's an absence of standardized border control checks along the river and limited visual surveillance on the river as well. And finally, in terms of logistics, there's poor infrastructure in some ports along the river. That's changed a little bit as a result of the war, but still the increase in traffic as a result of the use of the Danube ports by Ukraine did not result in a corresponding improvement in security. So you had a lot more traffic, but not increased monitoring of what was going on. And most cargo is transported in bulk. You can't scan a barge. You can scan containers, but you can't scan a barge. So most things are discovered by accident. There are therefore gaps in intelligence. There are some national statistics, but as I mentioned, there's no database where these countries share all of this stuff. I met one guy who's doing a PhD thesis who's a Hungarian customs official. He had his own little database because there wasn't one that he could use otherwise. There are different sections of the river which seem vulnerable to different types of traffic. So if you imagine dividing the river into 3 pieces, the top bit is more or less in the Schengen zone. If something comes through one direction or another, there are really no checks once it's going up and down that stretch of the river. So basically between the North Sea and Mohacs in Hungary or Vukovar in Croatia. Then you've got the middle bit, Serbia, Romania, up to the area around the Danube Delta, which has its own little kind of ecosystem, both in terms of nature, but also in terms of ecosystems of organized crime. And that's the area around Moldova and Ukraine, going as far as I'd say the port of Constanza. There you can see some of the different types of crime that seem to be more prevalent. So in the Schengen area, it's mostly the smuggling of cigarettes, to a lesser extent, some smuggling of migrants. There's a very real risk of smuggling of cocaine. Think of all the cocaine that comes in through the ports in the Netherlands. It's very easy to move those containers then onto ships coming down the Danube. In the second sector, it's very much the smuggling of fuel and migrants. And in the third, trade misinvoicing. And there's a real threat of weapons smuggling from Ukraine, which my colleague Brian will talk about now.
Yeah, cheers. No, thanks, Walter. Thanks, Christian. So they've given me one slide to kind of...
The most important slide.
Yeah, I can't really see it there, so I have some notes that I'm going to be working off of. But so, I mean, Walter did a very good job of talking about the research that we did, the analysis, and looking at, sort of the state of play around the vulnerabilities. I'm going to touch on what we've been seeing around those challenges and those issues as it relates to the war in Ukraine that's ongoing, and especially since the full-scale invasion in February 2022, and what we've been seeing there, and sort of what the state of play is around both smuggling routes, as well as I've been asked to kind of touch on what we've been seeing around the illicit arms economy as well, which is also kind of takes into place, contraband and other things along those lines. So, I mean, as you guys are aware, February 2022, there was a blockade on Ukraine's Black Sea ports, which forced a lot more traffic going up the Danube and then finding other routes to move goods. And so, since then, it's you can say as far as the cooperation and security issues of that, it was more or less business as usual, even with increased traffic. Granted, there was efforts to build out port facilities and infrastructure to address, sort of that overflow coming in at the time, as well as sort of looking towards the future of, with if that those flows would have been maintained. However, those flows we saw peaked in 2022 and 2023, and also looking into 2024. But we've seen now those levels of traffic along the Danube and through those ports has more or less in many ways returned to what they were prior to February 2022. But that said, even though the traffic levels remain the same, the challenges that we're seeing and the security risks, they still remain. So as mentioned, we're going to look at two things here. One, looking at the smuggling routes themselves, and secondly, looking at what we're seeing as far as the illicit arms economy around the war. So as Walter went on and as Christian, we talked about, there's traffic remains along the Danube. Obviously, it's a major route going from the Black Sea through Europe and back as well. But that said, it's not the easiest way with goods that are being shipped to both detect the way that they are being shipped. And what we're seeing is really sort of now moving back to its specialized cargo or cargo that's destined for a specific. Yeah, I can try.
Or you take the mic.
Yeah, no, I think this works. I can talk. Yeah. And so basically, just to go back there, we're seeing cargo that's going along. It's specialized cargo in certain types of containers, certain types of ships, or it's cargo that's being destined for a certain destination along that route. But, I guess kind of going on that, we've also seen with the shipments and with the events over the past couple of years, what we've seen, across the region and, looking into the organized crime landscape, organized crime groups, criminal groups, and actors have really adapted to the opportunities that have emerged since 2022. And what we've seen them doing in the region is both trying to take advantage of the opportunities that are at the ports, where possible, whether that be, moving in and trying to be the ones that are sort of still moving things within this expanded sort of, with expanded infrastructure and the improved facilities. And secondly, they've also gone in, and it's not necessarily related to the river itself, but you're looking at the Danube River as a whole, and they've really taken efforts to, maintain their control over smuggling routes over land, and also to sort of strengthen those cross-border ties. So you see, it's basically the apparatus for smuggling and moving illicit items in those illicit markets is actually very much increased. So that's important looking at, the smuggling routes when you're looking at the illicit arms economy that we're seeing and looking at in the region. Everybody's aware, weapons are continuing to flow into Ukraine and, as well as on the other side of the front line. I think everybody reads the headlines every single day, and that's going to continue for the foreseeable future. And we say, while many of these weapons remain at the front line or near the front line for obvious reasons, there is increasing evidence that these weapons are moving westwards, and they're being stockpiled and being stored. And frightening thing there is, we're not, are they going to go to the illicit market into the West? Are they there for other reasons? There's sort of, that's still up in the air, but what we are seeing is that they are moving westward. And so I think, we were talking about sort of an analogy to use a sponge when the pressure is sort of building up and looking at the next phase of the war. When that sponge is then sort of pressed down upon, that has to go somewhere. And whether that be, one of the directions it's going to go is westwards. So, and what we have been seeing, there have been some small cases of small arms, light weapons, and explosives that have been, trafficked westwards out of Ukraine through this region. And, some of them have been test cases, is what we've been told by law enforcement. But where that's happened once, it's probably going to happen moving forward, especially where you see levels of violent crime in Europe is on the rise, as well as that means corresponds to increased demand. So, and the other thing that we're witnessing as well is with the arms, they're not just being stockpiled, they're not being moved in and amongst themselves. You're also seeing the movement with other forms of contraband, as well as with synthetic drugs as well, which is also something that's worrisome. So you have groups that previously might have just been working in one sort of sector, but now they're actually cooperating together. So I guess to circle back on this, there are longstanding security issues and risks around the Danube River and the region as a whole. I think the initial period after the full-scale invasion really served to sort of highlight this, but I don't think we're out of that period. I mean, they're still there, they still remain, and there's something I think that should stay, front to mind as we're looking, towards the future and what comes next. And with that, I think hand it back over to Walter to go through some recommendations.
Sure. Just a few points that we highlighted in the report, and frankly, which become all the more relevant because of what Brian just pointed out, is first of all, the need for data collection. This is a blind spot on the main artery through the middle of Europe. So we need more information. And again, there are plenty of systems that exist, like the Central Eastern European Reporting Information System. It should be used more uniformly, and the sharing of information among countries along the river. It seems that the EU Danube strategy is a good umbrella to do that. Also, forwarding and sharing information gained in the international fora, like through Europol, Interpol, and others, applying it to security along the river. Also engaging with the private sector. A lot of these ports are either owned or run by private companies, also the security in some of these ports. And some of them are called free ports, but that doesn't mean they're free of security in theory. So you have this potential through the Danube strategy, through PA11, but also the Danube Port Network to improve that type of cooperation, not least in terms of prevention. For policing, we've suggested the possibility of exploring some kind of network of law enforcement in the river. It doesn't have to be a big bureaucracy, but a very practical network, at least starting with information sharing, enhancing technical surveillance along the river, and also scaling up the customs cooperation, for example, the existing teams that already exist, and providing more specific trainings for security along the river. Finally, cooperation, both national and international cooperation. We've suggested the creation of national coordination centers, police and customs cooperation centers, so-called PCCCs. That's relatively standard procedure, but it's not being implemented in too many countries. You have that in also bilateral cooperation between Hungary and Croatia. There's a lot of scope for improving this at the bottom part of the river between Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. Again, don't forget, the borders and the ports are very close together. It's very easy to foster cooperation. Also to create a network between all such centers along the Danube. That's not a big bureaucracy. It's not a lot of money. It's just basically a very practical, pragmatic suggestion, and encourage closer trilateral cooperation between Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, not least in the process of EU harmonization and accession. So to conclude and to summarize, my sense is that security along the Danube has been a more or less forgotten issue, and that particular section of the river at the bottom by the Black Sea is more forgotten than others. This is a fantastic opportunity space for illicit economies. All of a sudden, because of the war in Ukraine, there's a lot more attention on the Danube for trade. There's less attention in terms of security. As Brian mentioned, you've got all the weapons going into the country. Very few are coming out, but one day that sponge will be squeezed. Some of that stuff might come along the Danube. We already see from very large seizures by accident that there is illicit traffic up and down the river. That tells you that these people are not doing that for this first time. They're obviously networks in the river and behind the river. Let's not forget that it's not just along the river. So these are things that we think that should be addressed. If you're interested, have a look at the report. It's 2 years old, but we have fresher information about the war economy in Ukraine and how that's affecting illicit economies. I encourage you to check it out. And back to you.
Great, thank you. So I would use, first of all, thanks a lot of interesting stuff in there. I would give the floor if there are questions already on either of the topics raised so far. Yeah. Okay, sorry, can you hear it all, or shall I just hear? Mike, okay. Yeah. Turn off the volume. Yeah.
We know if there are already some initiatives in that area cooperation between Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine. And from the list of recommendations, what would be the most effective to start with?
Yeah, maybe I start. You want to start?
So the amount of law enforcement cooperation between Moldova, Ukraine, and Romania is limited. I think the European Union and Europol would have some leverage. That's not being used very much. I think the lowest hanging fruit that would be easy to start with is to have some kind of law enforcement network, at least liaison officers along the river. There are precedents in other parts of the world. Improving the information sharing so that you have a better idea. Maybe there isn't that much illicit activity up and down the river, but we simply don't know. And that to me is rather alarming.
Yeah, so we did not script this. We haven't met before, but of course we are currently planning an EUSDR-funded workshop on international police cooperation to be held in Bucharest in January, which focuses on exactly these topics. And basically a lot of what we do is exactly that. So how do you improve intelligence-led policing, which means you first have to come up with data that you can use, data that is valid and data that is checked. And then you have to see how can I disseminate, how can I exchange this kind of information to the ones who need it. And that is exactly the purpose of this January workshop. I actually wanted to show it in the concluding slides, but thanks for bringing it up. Any other question? Oh, yeah.
Good morning to everybody. I'm the Executive Secretary of the International Commission for the Protection of the Danube River. So we come from the environmental security side. And I'm always interested in, the overlaps that we usually don't look into. So PA 11 is not a priority area we are cooperating with, but you mentioned that there is no common database. And I was just wondering if the database of organizations like the Danube Commission for Navigation in Budapest is useful, or the one of Via Donau in Austria.
So strange as it may seem, the Danube Commission doesn't have a mandate for security. So I think that was part of the logic of having PA 11. For Via Donau, that's more to do with the private sector. I think both of those could be an umbrella, but there must be reasons why they haven't done this already. Perhaps they don't want to compromise their main activities. One thing, since you're from the environmental sector, I was struck when we were doing research in the Danube Delta area. It was environmental NGOs that often came to us and said, we're concerned about the natural ecosystem in this region, the dredging of the ports, the changes that are happening because of the war. But by the way, we can tell you something about the ownership of that port and so on. So they know, they have this very granular information, which I was a little bit worried when they were volunteering this because I didn't want to get them in trouble. But they had a very clear picture of who's who and what's going on. So I think this is also something that we stress in our work, and that's why we're very happy about this cooperation, is for law enforcement to draw on the knowledge of civil society. We reach out to different organizations, including environmental organizations. They're not spies, but they have local networks. They understand the situation, the dynamics, the ownership of the ports, the way things work. And that can very often give police insights that they might not be getting through information on seizures or just the law enforcement cooperation. So we always talk about this kind of whole of society approach. And for me, a missing link is really the private sector. And maybe this is where Via Donau and others can be helpful.
So 2 points you mentioned. So we have it in the presentation as inter and intra-agency cooperation. This is exactly what we're talking about. And since you mentioned it, the databases are an issue. We currently have it in Germany. There are private companies offering databases on stolen watches, which can be highly interesting when it comes to mobile organized crime groups. The issue is, when are we allowed to actually use those databases, and how much information do we compromise or give a third party that is not part of law enforcement? So that is more the restriction of how to access the data, who is allowed to access the data, and what kind of metadata do I pass on when I use that database. So that is the issue with that. I hope that answered your question.
So my question is corruption, and I'm really interested in if you have any tools how to fight the corruption on all the levels, because I can imagine, yeah, it exists.
Go on that first.
I think this is a great question, because you can have all the capacity building of law enforcement or customs officials that you want. And let's face it, there's been 25 to 30 years of this in these countries. But if there are corrupt officials or corrupt owners of the ports, then all of that will be undone. So this is where it's very important to be strengthening integrity of the people who work there, but to have the checks and balances about the ownership of the ports, holding them accountable. What we see in some cases along the Danube, but certainly in other parts of the world, the worst case scenario is when the business, the criminal, and the political elites are more or less the same people or traveling in the same circles. So from the outside, it might look like this is a very highly efficient port, has all the latest infrastructure and so on. But behind it, there are no checks and balances to be really monitoring what's going on or preventing money laundering. So these are the kinds of things that I think the EU in particular has, first of all, the self-interest, but also the tools to be strengthening this type of accountability. And I can tell you from the few port assessments that I did in the lower part of the river, there's a lot of work to do.
I might add to that as well. I know there's a lot of work going on in the region around corruption and putting in place toolkits, capacity building, and helping with policy frameworks and different legislation. I think also, having worked in this region for years, and also coming from a place in the US in the South, which also still has an issue with corruption, there's very much this culture around corruption. So I think that's something that a lot of times we talk about corruption, what can be done is kind of thrown out to the side. And it's easier just to go through and do the check the box exercises. So I think understanding that culture, understanding the incentives, understanding those relationships, as Walter mentioned, of where you do have criminals, you have private sector, and you have politicians and government sort of all working in tandem, and they switch hats. So I think it's having that understanding as you're moving forward with these steps is also very important, especially so. And it's also something that doesn't take place overnight. And I think for example, there's the EU accession reports that came out yesterday looking at some of these countries. Great job on the progress, but I also think, having worked with the EU, sometimes it is a check the box exercise moving towards accession, as Christian said, for 2030. But I think understanding that is a long-term thing, and that it is a generational thing, is also something that needs to be taken into account. But I think having that in the background will help you better understand what tools can be used and how they should be applied. So.
Yeah, and also a shout out to one of the GI reports on corruption in the Western Balkans. That was a very good one. I can only recommend that. When it comes to law enforcement, so what we can do is training and joint projects where best practice models are, for example, exchanged. There are good models, like in Albania, for example, and there are trainings that are being done by German police officers for their counterparts in different countries. So that is what we can do, improve the capacity and capabilities of individual officers in that field. So that's what we can do. Okay, any other questions? We keep you from the coffee break. I'm sorry for that. So if you want to rush out to get your coffee, we're not angry, but I would continue with sort of, yeah. Oh, there's another question.
Yeah, very interesting issue here in this session. I would like to raise a political question. You mentioned a lot of gaps in security. You mentioned it's a forgotten issue here. My question is, why? the politicians are outside. Why is it not a political issue? Why don't we have an integrated management board or a institutionalized cooperation somehow? Can you explain it a little more? Why is it not on the top issue in the agenda?
I don't know what is happening here. A very strange noise. I hope the room is not about to explode. Yeah, it's calling for coffee. That's it. So, but it restarts. So it's the tea kettle is going on again. We're heating up, and I pass over to you.
Maybe I'll use this one.
Yep.
It's better. I asked myself that question last year, and I realized we're being web streamed. This is probably not Chatham House, but Austria was chairing meetings in Vienna of the Danube Commission, and we were bringing up this issue. Why not have more political attention? And when there are some political tensions between countries along the river, this seems like something where there are common interests. So Hungary has an interest in this, has pushed very hard in the past. There are other countries that I think would be interested in cooperation. I don't understand it. And I think it might be because there are other priorities to do with trafficking, migrants in particular. It may also be because there are not a lot of seizures. So people say, well, what is the problem if you're a politician? I don't see any problem on the river. Our response was, you're not looking for the problem on the river. So there are these seizures by accident, which are rather large. That's telling us something. So I think it's a question of resources and priorities. But if you're looking for something that would foster cooperation in a relatively inexpensive way that could have broader benefits in terms of strengthening integrity as well, to me, it seems rather straightforward.
Yeah, and I can only add the point of we talk a lot about poly-crisis. There are a lot of crises going on at the moment. You only have a certain attention span and resources, mental resources. So there are things that if they don't point directly at you, you're not paying attention to it. And maybe that's why you're shouting it out. Question, answer, I hope. Any other question? No? Okay, then I would go on with this. So in addition to what the two colleagues here mentioned, and we use their highly recommendable report on Ukraine for, as a backdrop. So we had a workshop in Chisinau, bringing together colleagues who worked on a particular case involving the trafficking of firearms. And we wanted to bring all of them together. So it's the network component. But we wanted to focus on a specific issue, and that is the illicit trafficking of firearms from Ukraine or to Ukraine. As Brian has already mentioned, currently we see rather a flow of firearms into Ukraine and not the other way around. But as we all hope, when the guns fall silent, it might go the other way. So it's more of how can we improve how we currently work, and how can we prepare for what is going to come in the future. And this already includes a lot of things that I've already talked about. The result is basically, we had colleagues from Sweden. When you look into newspapers nowadays, you see a lot of crime happening in Sweden. And the Swedish colleagues came up with an extraordinary concept of how to address this. This has a lot to do with youth crime. This has a lot to do with stopping and trafficking, so the individual parts of guns that are trafficked by car, by cargo, by parcel, whatever you can imagine, and they end up in Sweden. So they came up with a very good solution on how to improve things. There was a call for lobbying for the addition of partners to Europol. That's an operational partners, we call them. These operational agreements allow us to exchange information directly with countries who are not part of the EU. And of course, it's about prevention campaigns and a cooperation with private companies, private and arms sellers, for example. There's a lot of need for further data to be exchanged, and this was part of this workshop, which happened last year in Chisinau, as I said. And of course, we were very happy. Most of you will know Robert Lichtner. He's an excellent guy lobbying for aspects of certain PAs and bringing them to the EU's attention, to the Commission's attention. And he did that with MPACT, which is a structure of projects that focus on certain topics, in that case, firearms. So MPACT and EUSDR joined forces to bring forth more attention on these issues. And these are follow-up initiatives that we have. So as I already mentioned, there will be a workshop in Bucharest focusing on international police cooperation with a particular focus on colleagues from Ukraine. We are planning to have a flagship initiative on the effects of the war against Ukraine. It's a follow-up on the one we had last year in Moldova, focusing, let's see how it turns out, but maybe more on organized crime and how it has changed in this new environment of lower resilience and more opportunities for organized crime to operate. And there will be another conference on MOCGs, which is going to take place next year in September. All right, with that, I would conclude and I would pass back to Verena.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Walter, and Brian, for your brilliant presentation. I think we can give you a warm applause for that. Of course, within the Danube Region strategy, we can't solve all the security issues, but as we can see, there are a lot of dark spots still, which we need to highlight, but we do have approaches, and yeah, maybe next year we already have got more positive information. Now, coming from security to economy, maybe Mr. Speyer, you want to join me? There was a study on the economy of the Ukraine. So speaking about collaboration of PAs, the PA8 made this really good study. It just appeared recently. And I think you, Mr. Speyer, can give us a few words with it.
Thank you, honorable guests. Very interesting discussion. Thank you for this session. And I'm Frank from the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the region of Baden-Württemberg. And we are connecting with our Ukrainian partners and friends in 3 ways: bilateral, the companies of Baden-Württemberg with the companies of Ukraine, but we are also responsible for the Interreg program. So this is a strong connection. And thirdly, we are leading the PA8. Here we are in PA11, and we are for the to increase the competitiveness of the enterprises. And we thought, which are the best partners to connect with, which are the best sectors. And today we launched a new study about this. And on the last slide, you can go further. The last slide, I want only to show you the barcode to look at it. You can see where the clusters, the current situations in the Ukraine, we have made a SWOT analysis, and it's made a study by VDE, and Ukraine partners. So maybe it's of interest also for your themes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speyer. Yeah, I think this was it from our side. Thanks a lot for your attention, for joining us at our session here from PA11. Please feel free to approach us if you still have got questions or want to have deeper insights. As Walter mentioned, here is the report of the GI. Feel free to take a copy. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the annual forum.